Good evening, everyone.
Can you stop the recording, please, till we're ready to start the meeting?
Yeah, we're good to go. We can start.
Great, thank you. Good evening and welcome. We'd like to call to order the joint meeting of the Common Council Finance and Claims Committee and the Board of Education Finance and Claims Committee for today, Wednesday, November 9th, 2022, beginning at 6:03 p.m. Before we proceed forward with the agenda, we'd like to call the roll of the two finance committees. For the Finance and Claims Committee, Council Member David Hooverman is on. Council Member John Kites, Council Member Jen McMurray, Council Member Diana Revolus, and I believe that is it from the Finance Committee.
Councilmember Nora Najelski-Agner also. Hey, Greg.
Okay, hello Nora, I see you now, thank you. And so Colin, over to you for the roll call of the Board of Ed Finance Committee.
Thank you, Greg, and good evening, everyone. And welcome to tonight's joint meeting of the Finance Committees. On behalf of the Board of Education, I am Colin Hostin, Chair of the Finance Committee, and joined by my colleagues, Karen Nelson-Bakey and Diana Carpio, who are also on the Finance Committee, and joined by fellow board members, Erica De Palma, and I think that's it.
Great, thank you. And we also have Common Council Member Barbara Smith on, also joining us this evening on the call. So with that, we'd like to open with comments from Mayor Harry Rilling, as well as Superintendent Dr. Alex Estrella. So over to you, Mayor.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you, everybody, for being here. You know, it's a very challenging thing. I want to thank the members of the Common Council Board of, the Finance and Claims Committee, the same with the Board of Education Finance and Claims Committee. The jobs you have are not easy. We know that we have to provide a world-class education for our children. We also know that we have to be fair and reasonable when it comes to taxing our residents. So it is a big challenge, especially now when times are difficult, when things are not as normal as they were at one point in time, and people are struggling. People are looking for ways to support their families, but we're also very, very aware of the fact that we can't let that dissuade us from providing our children with a good education. So I know that your work is cut out for you. The work is, as I mentioned, not easy, but I am sure that you're up to the tasks and you'll keep all these things in consideration as we move forward and plan for our next year's budget. So again, thank you for your hard work. I know that you put a lot of time in, a lot of energy, a lot of creativity, and a lot of thought. And for one, I truly appreciate it. And I know the people of the city of Norwalk do as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Rilling. Dr. Estrella.
Good evening, everyone, members of the board, members of Common Council. Thank you for joining us today in this joint conversation, an important conversation that will initiate the work that we need to do. One, to ensure, like the mayor articulated, that we're making informed and well-intended decisions that not only benefit the community at large, but also benefit the students we serve, particularly because, as Mr. Asmani will speak to, we are entering a phase where ESSER funds will be depleted, yet the need for additional supports and intervention continue to exist and won't cease anytime soon, given the learning loss that has taken place throughout the pandemic. So we're looking forward to a collaborative dialogue today so that both parties can be well informed as we continue to move forward in the budget process.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Estrella. Before we move, the next item on the agenda is public participation. Is there anyone from the public that has dialed in that wishes to speak? If at this time, you can raise your hand electronically and the IT support will allow you an opportunity to speak. If you could take 3 minutes to share your comments and clearly state your name. Can you let us know if there's anyone that has raised their hand to speak at this time?
I am not seeing any. Oh, I see one. Brian Meek.
Yeah, I
Brian
just want to
Meeks.
let you know, just to let you know I was here.
Thank you.
I didn't get a panelist invite.
We'll correct that.
No worries.
Is there anyone from the public that wishes to speak?
Not seeing anyone else.
Okay. With that, we'll close public participation. And just for the record, can please indicate that Brian Meeks, council member Brian Meeks, a member of the Financial Claims Committee, has joined the meeting, as well as council member Heidi Altman has also joined the meeting. So tonight, the joint meeting will be an opportunity to share information and continue the dialogue. So both committees, as was stated, can better understand the operating budget goals and objectives for the upcoming 2023-2024 fiscal year and budget cycle. It's essential that we understand the priority items as we move forward towards creating one City of Norwalk operating budget. The actual budget requests are being formulated as we speak within the city departments and grant agencies as they prepare to submit those budgets to the finance department in November and go through budget reviews in the month of December. Our proposed plan is to hold another joint meeting of the finance committees in January of 2023 to further review specific details and budget requests. Tonight, we will first receive information from the Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Henry Dakowitz, covering the city operating budget guidelines, followed by the Norwalk Public Schools Chief Financial Officer, Lunda Osmani, covering the operating budget priorities for the Board of Education. And I'll pass over to Colin, Chairman of the Finance Committee, if you have any opening comments before we start with Mr. Dakowitz.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Burnett. And again, thanks to everyone for being here. I think it's great that we're starting this process a little earlier than we have in the past. A lot of us have talked about the fact that this budget, as the mayor said, represents not just a financial plan for the city and for our schools, but it's a commitment that we're making to our constituents and to our students to a certain standard of operations and ideals. We always say if you want to identify an organization's priorities, you should look at how it spends its money. And one thing that I can say on behalf of the board is that the Norwalk Public Schools remains committed to making every one of our students ready to face whatever future awaits them, especially after, as Dr. Estrella alluded, the very challenging recent past we've all been through. I think as Mr. Osmani will present, the budget that we'll eventually request on the Board of Ed side will show a commitment to the slow but steady work of helping students navigate the aftermath of this global pandemic. And we are investing in the basics, the important curricular and pedagogical work that our school system is based on. And so tonight we get a chance, as Greg said, to learn more about the macro factors that are going to drive the numbers in our eventual budget request. And I look forward to this opportunity to engaging with our colleagues on the council in a substantive discussion and Q&A so that we have a more shared understanding of how the budget is being built. And I want to say one thing, if folks haven't had a chance to look at the, now I can say award-winning 2022-23 budget book. I hope you please do. And kudos to Mr. Osmani and his entire team. It really does a great job of laying out not just the numbers for our current year, but all the metrics behind the strategies of executing on our goals. So I highly recommend. Great read.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
And congratulations on the award-winning presentation, Mr. Amani. Great job there. So with that, Mr. Dakowitz, our Chief Financial Officer, if you wanted to share your screen and start the presentation.
Sure, thank you, Chairman Burnett. Okay, so we're here to talk about guidance for the fiscal 24 budget process. And basically, we're looking at an environment with a challenging economic outlook. We're suffering from stagflation, high inflation plus an economic recession. Inflation in September was recorded at 8.2% per annum. Recession, we already had 2 quarters of negative GDP growth in the first 2 quarters of this year, which is the traditional measure of recession. The third quarter came in positive, but economists are expecting some future quarters of negative growth. Interest rates have increasing significantly, including the Federal Reserve short-term rates, US Treasury rates, borrowing rates for credit cards, autos, and mortgages. The average 30-year fixed mortgage hit 7.16% in late October. And because of that, the housing market is starting to falter with the increase in mortgage borrowing rates. Stock markets are officially in a bear market, defined as down over 20%. Here it's been since January. Since August, it's been down 15%. And one of the lesser known impacts is that the increasing US interest rates strengthens the US dollar in foreign currency markets. And that puts pressure on foreign currencies. The UK pound, the euro, the Japanese yen are all setting record lows versus the US dollar. And foreign currency pressure on developing countries may cause unexpected economic turmoil and civil unrest. National firms have announced layoffs ranging in many industries: Goldman Sachs and Credit Suisse, Apple, Facebook, Meta, Peloton, Novartis, the pharmaceutical company, Amazon, Ford, Nestle, The Gap. We then look at some Connecticut firms that have announced layoffs. We start with the Wall Street Journal reported that Stanley Black & Decker, headquartered in Connecticut, reported 1,000 layoffs. The company recently stated that that number is inaccurate, but they did not give a replacement number. M&T Bank, with their acquisition of People's Bank, 325 already laid off, 333 more expected to come. Semaphore Genomics Company, with headquarters in Stamford, laying off 158 in Stamford, and they have a lab in Branford outside New Haven, another 81. Full Frontal, the cable TV show, laid off 63 in Norwalk. So we're seeing some very challenging negative consequences. The Connecticut Insider WFSB poll just a month ago said the voters' most important issues are inflation, the cost of living, and the economy. So we're seeing challenges. There's uncertainty going forward. We're not sure what's going to happen, but we're seeing clouds and negative indications which cause us some concern. The impact on Norwalk budgeting is as follows. So the first step is we'd like to implement tight controls on spending increases. Each department is being asked to manage any request for a spending increase to be contained between 2.5% and 3.5% for fiscal 2024. The final budget spending increases may be lower than that 3.5% maximum. Number two, there are some fixed cost budget items which we expect to have higher increases in the 7 to 12% range. Health insurance, pension contributions, OPEB contributions. OPEB stands for other post-employment benefits, and that mostly relates to health insurance coverage for our retirees, and debt service, the principal and interest payments on our bonds. Number three, we intend to offset the increases on the items in number two that are less controllable by utilizing some ARPA grant funds, if available, and drawing down our long-term undesignated, unallocated reserves, our rainy day funds. So the concept is the departments come in at 2.5% to 3.5%. There are some items which are less controllable by us, which are going to come in much higher, and we will offset those higher increases by drawing down on our rainy day funds or ARPA grants, so that ultimately the amount of tax increase would be as low as we could possibly get it. We are very concerned about these negative economic impacts of the stagflation economy on our taxpayers. Individuals may be asked to cut back on their hours of work. Individuals may lose their jobs. Companies, employers may go out of business. Connecticut has still not recovered all of the jobs we had before the Great Recession in 2008. There's a migration of taxpayers from Connecticut to low tax states, which is expected to continue. And unlike COVID over the last 2-3 years, we cannot expect federal or state assistance, such as the funding we received in the recent past, to offset COVID expenses and the additional ARPA federal funding. Here's what we propose to do. One, we're committed to continuing to provide essential municipal services at the lowest possible cost and minimize the tax increases to the Norwalk taxpayers. Number two, we will manage as best we can those less controllable costs of debt service and employee benefits. We will identify opportunities to reduce spending and prioritize additional increases to the budget. And fourth, we are committed to offsetting the total spending increases by utilizing ARPA funds as available and drawing down on our rainy day funds. So it's a challenging environment, as the mayor has indicated. These are the steps we are taking to try to protect our taxpayers as best we can. And these are the guidelines we're using, and we have already communicated to all the departments as we sent out our pro forma operating budget packages a week ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dakowitz. Are there any questions of either committee at this time, or any members that are of the council and the Board of Education? Yes, Councilmember Meeks.
Yeah, thanks. Do we have any preliminaries on the school census data for this year? Did we see an increase that might put pressure on that budget? Thanks.
I'm assuming you're directing that question to the Board of Education as opposed to Mr. Dakowitz.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Maybe I went out
Yes,
of
if you have
line
it,
here.
Mr. Asmani will be presenting shortly. So if there's any questions related to what Mr. Dakowitz just shared, we'll entertain those questions at this time.
Just one question. How is our how is our debt portfolio structured? I mean, we're locked in at lower rates from all the bonding and refunding we've done over the years. Is that correct?
Well, we've refunded all bonds that we could. I believe last year we refunded a bond issue that I did 3 years ago. And basically the investment bankers told us this past summer, we've refunded everything as interest rates went down. There's nothing left to refund as interest rates go up. We tend to be very conservative with our borrowing. Since I've been here, and a large percentage of our borrowings are to construct school facilities, which generally have a useful life of 40 to 50 years. I made the decision to borrow for those schools over a 30-year period. So the debt associated with schools is over a 30-year period. Obviously, by extending the term maturity of those bonds, each year's repayments are smaller, so it allows us to borrow more funds, which we needed with the hundreds of millions of dollars planned for the school construction. But we borrowed fixed rate, not floating. We amortize over 30 years with a level payment every year. So obviously, in the first years, the amount of interest is larger than the principal repayment. And after we get over the crossover point, we are paying off more of the bonds, but pretty conservatively structured.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Nora Najelski, I think you had your hand up.
I did, thank you. I actually had a related question to Councilmember Meeks, which I think Mr. Dakowitz primarily answered, but just to follow up on that point. So we have achieved a very low interest rate. Thank you very much for your hard work in refinancing all of that up until this point. But we are anticipating that this year's capital bonding will be at a significantly higher interest rate. And do you have a sense yet of approximately how much we are planning on bonding this year? Or is there some ability to delay while we hope that interest rates, come back down?
Let me take the first part and talk about history. So the summer of 2020, we borrowed at 1.75%. It's 30-year debt, AAA. The summer of 2021, we borrowed at 2%, 30-year AAA debt. This past summer, again, 30-year AAA debt, and we paid about 3.6%. Since then, so we're talking less than 3 months, it would probably cost us 4.6%. The Fed keeps raising rates, and the municipal markets, if not immediately, eventually react to the increase in interest rates. So we've done as well as we could historically with borrowing during the low interest environment. As I've explained in the past, there's a disconnect between our annual capital budget and the amount of money we borrow. When I got here, we had approximately 175 million of approved capital projects that we had not bonded. There's a reason for this. The IRS has very strict rules about tax-free borrowing. You're not allowed to borrow more than you need, and you're not allowed to borrow for a longer period of time than you need. So if you're borrowing 100 million for a bridge that takes 2 years to construct, you're not allowed to borrow 150 million for 4 years. So consequently, when we look at what we borrow, we have to focus on the actual cash flow. How much are we going to spend for construction and other capital expenditures? So what our controller, Chitsime Lamb, and I do every quarter is that we take a survey of all of the department heads and chiefs who are in charge of our capital projects. And we ask them to forecast, it's a quarterly forecast going out into the future for 2 years, to say, how much do you expect to spend on this project quarter by quarter? And how much reimbursement do you expect to receive for that project? The reimbursements are primarily state reimbursements for school construction projects, but obviously that affects our cash flow. And what we do is we try to make sure we have enough cash on hand so that the department heads and chiefs can follow their construction projections, while at the same time not having excess cash on hand, which might violate IRS rules. So we've been doing this now for probably about 2 years. And this past summer is a very good example. Last year's capital budget, I believe that was approved, was approximately $39 million. But we borrowed $82 million. We had net proceeds of $90 million. The reason is, out of that 39, I believe it was projected that we would spend about 25 in the coming 12 months. The rest of that balance is the department heads and chiefs starting to spend money on those older projects that we had not borrowed for yet. And that's why we ended up borrowing larger than the capital budget. So you asked the question about what's happening coming forward. So we've just started the capital budget season. I believe the packages for those went out this past Friday. And again, we'll have a listing and there'll be requests and there'll be negotiation, and ultimately the council and the Board of Estimate and Taxation will decide what gets approved. However, the way Chitsime and I are guided, we will then ask all the department heads and chiefs of the new projects in this current year capital project program budget, how much do you expect to spend in the coming 4 quarters? And at the same time, we'll go back to those old projects, existing projects, and say, how much do you expect to need to spend? And that's how we determine the size of the bond offering. Obviously, the rates are high, but unless someone reduces the amount of money that we're spending or we plan to spend in the next 12 months, I have to borrow enough money to make sure. I don't want to have anyone come to me and say, we're in the middle of the summer, it's our construction season, the weather is good, and you're telling me you don't have money to pay the contractors. So I'm sorry if it's a long answer, but those are the factors that we take into consideration.
Thank you, Henry. Do you have any sense, just very roughly, of approximately how much we have in previously approved capital projects that have not yet been bonded out?
I happen to have something like that. I believe the number is a little bit north of 200 million.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that information.
You're welcome.
Great. With that, let's move to Mr. Amani's presentation on the Board of Ed priorities.
Thank you. Are you able to see the slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So again, thank you for the opportunity to share with you our budget priorities for the fiscal year 24. This year, we've approached this with, it is what we refer to as a maintenance budget. We are not including any new initiatives in the current year. So it's basically maintaining initiatives that we have as of today and trying to seek adequate funding to maintain those services and to provide that level of service to our children. We do have 5 major priority areas. I've listed them on the first slide, and then I'll kind of click through a couple of slides to go into detail. But the 5 priorities for us this year One is obviously addressing the phasing out of the ESSER funds, as my colleague Henry indicated during his presentation. The second priority for us is obviously, we're constructing the South Norwalk School. You recall that this year we did start children enrolled at the incubator school. However, the incubator school this year was funded not through the regular operating budget, but we had rollover funds from the prior year, and that's how we're paying for this year's operations at that school. So our plan for next year is to budget for the South Norwalk School the same way we do for the other 20 schools that we have through the school-based budget process, excuse me. At the conclusion of last year's budget, you recall we had conversations about the health insurance costs. We got, I think the entire state got a surprise bill in terms of the increase in terms of health insurance premiums. And so what we did with that, similar to how we funded the South Norwalk School, we were fortunate fortunate and unfortunate. We had huge vacancy rates last year, as most schools did. And therefore, we were able to have some savings in that year. We rolled over those savings, and that's essentially how we funded the health insurance costs for this year. However, going into fiscal year 24, our plan is to budget for fully funding the health insurance premiums as we've done in previous years through the operating budget. And I'll talk into some detail some of the things that we're looking at to try to mitigate cost of health insurance. The fourth item, this is the conversation we've had, is we have a Board of Ed liability account for insurance, and we also have a workers' compensation account similar to the health insurance account. So we have 3 insurance pools. For the past 3 to 4 years, these 2 accounts have had surpluses generated over time, going back from the period when we were self-insured, and we have been drawing down on those reserves. And we've depleted those reserves now, and therefore we would like to have a conversation about funding those accounts. The last couple of years, these have been funded on the city side, not on the Board of Ed side. However, because of those surpluses, neither the city nor the Board of Ed has had to contribute into those accounts. But we are at a point that we need to resume contribution to those accounts because we have depleted those years after 3 years of drawdown. And so we would like to have a conversation around that, just so that we both are aware how we're funding for that. And obviously we completed the efficiency study, and we have a series of recommendations, and we have begun to implement some of those efficiency studies recommendations in order to find savings. As you guys are aware as well, some of these are short-term that can be done immediately, but there are quite a number of recommendations that require conversation with unions and collective bargaining as they relate to stipends and pay. And I think that's where we're going to see most of the savings. And so as we engage in our collective bargaining, as the union contracts come up, we intend to have conversations so that we can try to address some of those. So I'll start talking about the first item here. When we talk about the ESSER funds, there were 3 tranches of ESSER, ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ESSER 3, and they have a expiration date or the latest date to spend those funds. So ESSER 1 is September of this year, September 30th, 2022, September 30th, 23, September 30th, 24. I think one thing to keep in mind is this is the last day that you can spend these funds. However, many of the projects and the programs that we use our ESSER funds will have been depleted by the end of this fiscal year, by June 30th. And that's why you recall over the past 2 years of conversation, we've been talking about a 2-year period of ESSER funds, because that is really the time period that we gave ourselves to spend these dollars. And that's we're on track of actually spending them down in 3 years. So by June 30th of next year, we will have almost depleted all of the ESSER funds, and we'll talk about some of the uses of those ESSER funds over time. So we use the ESSER funds in 3 broad buckets. The first bucket, you'll recall that when we are approving the fiscal year 22 budget, this was right when we received ESSER funds. We weren't sure of the restrictions, how much we were going to get. I believe at that time there was a policy decision that on the Board of Ed side, the local funded portion would remain flat at 0%, and we were to use any additional requested funds using these ESSER dollars. So which is what we did. So we traded off the local funding increase in our local budget, and we applied those expenses towards ESSER funds. So primarily we had social workers, counselors, and summer programs who would have been traditionally funded in the local budget. These were existing positions, existing programs, and we applied ESSER funds towards funding these programs in lieu of tax increases or tax support on the local budget. And so now we're at a point that 2 years have lapsed. We have been funding these positions and these programs to those funds, and these funds still exist, these programs still exist, and therefore it is time to put those back in the local budget. So that would be a priority of ours, addressing those. We did have a second bucket of ESSER funds. These were one time and these were one and done. But I do want to highlight we had technology purchases, obviously protective equipment, safe learning spaces for children, the desks, the shields, all of those things. These were one time, they were done. We're not bringing back additional requests to fund these items, but I show it on the slide just to show what we've spent the funds on. And then the final chunk of ESSER funds were, we did have some enhanced services on the education side, and Dr. Estrella mentioned some of those, addressing learning losses, counselors for social emotional learning, math and literacy coaches, a summer learning program, nurses for our schools. And so these were some of the things that, and this is what the ESSER funds were intended for, we actually applied those funds. And now as these ESSER funds are depleting, we will be looking at how can we continue some of these programs, understanding that it will be a challenge, but the need remains. And as we go through the process, we'll be sharing with you what those individual needs are, specific examples, and answer any questions that you may have. So that's the ESSER priority. The second one, as I mentioned, is obviously the South Norwalk School. This fiscal year, we funded operations of the school through rollover savings from last year. And therefore, as we go into the FY24 budget, we will be budgeting for that school the same way as we budget for all the schools, as part of our student-based, school-based budget, as we do with other schools, as part of the local budget request this year. Now, understanding that as the South Norwalk School goes into operation, there are some, it's not an incremental cost because some of these students are diverted from other schools to come to the South Norwalk School. So it's not a net increase of students that we wouldn't have otherwise had. But there are some overhead costs that can't be shared, administrative staff, schools, principals, counselors, and those types of things. When we come to you, when we put together the South Norwalk School budget, it will take into account some reductions from other schools where these students would have otherwise gone. And so we will bring a net number based on the student movement. And the third one is obviously I shared about the health insurance cost. We funded part of the health insurance this year in the local budget. The increased amount that we found out at the end of the budget process, we used that for the local dollar from rollover funds saved from the prior year. And so as we go into projections for fiscal year 24, we will be looking at what is the total cost of the health insurance in this fiscal year and see what that increment is. One of the things that we're doing to try to mitigate cost on the health insurance side is, as we have been negotiating these unions contracts, we have incrementally sought additional contributions from the employee share. And that is something that the unions and the Board of Ed have been working together on. But one thing that's unique this year is when we were negotiating the teacher contract, one of the things that they also wanted to partner with us is try to see, is there cheaper insurance out there? Is there a better way that we can cover health insurance costs, save money both on the employer side and on the employee side? So we are going through an RFP process, and we're exploring a higher deductible plan to see if there is indeed better plans than the state 2.0 that we're on that could provide some savings both for the employees and the district. We don't know what that RFP is going to yield. From what we know is we're probably really low where we are today. But anyway, in any event, we're going to explore and to see if there are potential savings in that area. And if we do see savings, we will go back to the unions. We do need all the unions to agree. We can't just take one union and leave the others out. But we believe that if we can demonstrate sufficient savings throughout the district to the employees, that most unions will be willing to go along with it. But this is an attempt, and we don't yet know how it's going to end. But we are looking to make those adjustments. And then I talked about the workers' compensation contributions and the liability. What we pay out of this account is the Board of Ed and the city have a joint policy through PERMA. We have a $1 million deductible. Essentially, the first $1 million is paid between the two of us. So if a boiler breaks at a high school, we determine what the cost of that boiler is. We would pay our share. If a police vehicle on the city side has some repairs that need to be done, the city will pay that portion of the deductible. And then we also pay the premiums out of this account. Roughly between the two, between the premiums and the deductible, last year was about 900,000 or so. And like I said, for the past 3 years, we have had reserves in this account that we've been drawing down upon, but we're at a point now where we haven't, we've depleted those reserves. So we look to have that conversation with the city just to figure out the best way to move forward. It is one insurance policy, and we just want to make sure that somebody has it accounted for so that when these premiums come due, we're able to meet those obligations. And then finally, as I shared, we will be looking at implementing findings and recommendations from the efficiency study just to see what savings we could get. We have already started. Our operations department has been working with the city's recreation department and parks department just to look at synergies, how we could work together. So we're starting to see some savings there. There were some recommendations on staffing. Particularly, I think we began with our communications department in-house, but we do have, I think, 7 or 8 chapters. And so we're kind of going through those, and the Board of Ed is being intentional in which recommendation to take. And as I mentioned, some of these require contract negotiations. And so as we go through those negotiations, we will also be trying to address those as they come up. And so that, in a nutshell, are the 5 Board of Ed priorities going into this budget that we wanted to share with you. Again, thank you for your time.
And thank you, Lunda, for your time in preparing this presentation and in really helping us understand some of the larger factors that will be influencing the budget that we ultimately request here at the Board of Education. And I think that one of the headlines that I hope folks are taking away is that this is not a year in which NPS is deciding to invest in a bunch of new priorities. This is where we are sort of recommitting our dedication to making sure that we are delivering the basics to our students and building upon the priorities that we have started in the last 2 or 3 years under Dr. Estrella. And you know, these are the other factors that we are taking into consideration as we build the budget. And so I think now is the time of the agenda where we can open it up for questions and discussion. This is a particularly great opportunity for us to share with our colleagues on the council some of the factors that are being taken into consideration as we finalize the numbers for this budget. And we'd love to make sure that that there is a sense of shared understanding and a sense of being informed of how our process is coming together. One thing I will just throw out there for Council Member Meek, I just was able to look up the enrollment numbers that we received for as of November 1, which was a total of 11,611 students. We can share those numbers with the entire council as well.
On that note, Colin, as well, to answer that question, each year as we go through the budget, we do get preliminary numbers from the demographer on enrollment, and those are the numbers that we use for the student-based budget. Preliminary numbers is he's projecting about 100 student increasing for the next fiscal year. Projections are a challenge this year just because 2021, 21, 22, because of COVID. It was kind of a not normal year. And so the methodology he's using is looking at 3 years historic numbers and then incorporating some of the trends that we're seeing with COVID and some of the enrollment that we're seeing this year. So it's kind of a combination of factors to determine what that enrollment is, just because the 2 COVID years have really disturbed the traditional trend countrywide in terms of enrollment.
Great. I see Councilmember David Hoovman, you have your hand raised.
Thank you, Chairman Burnett. First of all, if Tech could promote Councilmember Meek from a participant to a panelist, he's got bumped back into the participant area and his hand is up, and he should be as a panelist here and not as a participant. So if they can promote him, that would be great. Couple things. One is, do we have any data on how many years, going back maybe 10 years, 12 years, that we've had rollover? How much that rollover has been? How much has been, I know that if it's over a certain amount, I believe that it comes in front of the council to vote to be able to not roll that back into the budget, but roll it, that you guys keep that money. Do we have data on that? And do we have data going back a number of years? I'd love to see that, because I'd like to get an idea of, you know, and on average, how much money is left at the end of the year that you guys then move into the next operating budget. So if we can get those numbers at some point in the course of this process, that would be fantastic. The other question I have is going back into the would have been fiscal year 21, I think 22, possibly 23 also. I remember us having discussions, the discussions around, as we started to get this money because of COVID, the CARES Act, the ARPA funding, the ESSER money, that we talked about I know on the city side, we had a lot of discussions about this, and I know it came up in a couple of different meetings about the use of the ESSER funds for one-time events, one-time purchases, things that would be paid over the course of a couple of years, contract employees that would be paid over a course of the funds being available. And now with you running out, I'd like to see what that number is, the actual number. I'm looking forward to seeing it when we see your budget, to know how much money is that we're trying to now envelop into an operating budget that came out of what we knew had a finite life. And I'm hoping that we're going to see that and not just have it as a bullet point. So those are the only two things that I really wanted to say. I'd love to see those rollover numbers, though, as we move forward. So thank you.
Yes, David, we will be able to provide that historic rollover number. And then on the ESSER funds, that is indeed how we plan to present it in those 3 buckets that I shared, with backup documentation and the numbers and the positions. And all.
That's great. I'd really like to see, because I would like to know how much we're now moving into operating, which is going to then become a yearly operating cost, as opposed to one-time cost that I know we had numerous discussions while this money came to Norwalk about just that point. So thank you.
Councilmember Nora Jelski-Eichner.
Thank you, Chair Burnett. So, Mr. Osmani, I really want to thank you for your presentation. It's very helpful to have a sense of the priorities. I really extend my thanks to the superintendent and the school board for being cognizant of the need for this to be a maintenance budget, given some of the economic uncertainties Mr. Dakowitz outlined, and I'm really appreciative of that approach. And in particular, to Mr. Hoovelman's point, I do think that from my perspective, certainly there's a very important difference in the ESSER funding, buckets from the buckets that you outlined as bucket number 1, where you were directed to use these ESSER funds for items that had previously been in the operating budget in order to maintain that flat funded budget for that year, in distinction to buckets 2 and 3, which are costs that we knew going in would be challenging, if not impossible, to maintain without the ESSER funds. So, I really applaud you for breaking out the presentation that way. I hope that we can continue to have clarity in the discussions going forward to make sure that we really do understand what is truly maintenance and what are things that we're going to have to really balance against the challenges of property taxes in the city, as you have all heard me say a number of times, and I think will be repeated ad nauseum in the next few months. I very much want to invest in our schools. I believe deeply that our children deserve the best possible education, but I also really take to heart the need not to drive out of the city the very students that we are attempting to assist and strengthen in our schools. So it is going to be a balancing act, and I really appreciate how clearly you've laid out all of this information so far. I am looking forward, I will note, to hearing more about the South Norwalk School and its costs. I know that we had been concerned last year about launching the school as early as it was launched because of the amount of recurring costs that added to the budget in the years prior to the school really opening. So again, I think it will be helpful and important for us to understand just how much additional cost that is driving, and if there are ways that we can mitigate and minimize that, while we are not able to, as you said, absorb all of those costs because we need to continue to operate the schools that those students are coming out of. But like I said, I'm really looking forward to a productive conversation. I very much appreciate the framing and information you've given us so far. And I really express my enormous gratitude to everyone for starting this conversation this early. I really hope we can make this a very successful budget for our students and for our schools, and do as much as we can to maximize our resources for everyone in the city. So thank you.
Councilmember Jen McMurray, and we have about 6 minutes left to the meeting.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chairman Burnett. I also want to just reiterate, thank you for starting the conversation early. Thank you for your wonderful presentation and the way you broke it down. I just want to reiterate what my colleagues have said. I'm really interested in hearing enrollment projections for the SONO incubator, how many students are currently enrolled, what we think the projection of costs is going to be over the next few years so we can anticipate those costs. And then also, I'm really especially interested in learning how much the social workers, the counselors, the summer programs, and the math and literacy coaches are going to cost into the operating budget versus what we had been spending on the ESSER funds, because I think those have been really valuable for our students. And I would like to see those programs continue, obviously. I'm also wondering if there's been any discussion about special education, because I think we are running a little deficit in that area. I had a PPT meeting this afternoon myself, so it's something that's near and dear to my heart and something that I'm concerned about. So I look forward to having more conversations about that as well. I know it wasn't on your priority list, but I'm hoping it can roll in there somewhere. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. McMurray. We will be talking about that, and I welcome council members to join us to our next business meeting, where we were going to provide an update around special education and services and some of the costs associated with providing services not only within district but out of district, and some of the rising costs as a result of some of the shortages across the state and nation.
Very good. Great. The next item on the agenda, and again, we have 4 minutes left because I know the members of the Board of Ed have another meeting to go to at 7 o'clock. The item that was going to be covered is the operating budget calendar, which is updated online. It was updated this week, so hopefully each committee will review the calendar so that you understand the next steps associated with the operating budget. As I mentioned, the budgets are being prepared by the departments now to be submitted in November, and budget review discussions to take place during December, early January. With the limited time that we have, we'll defer from going through the calendar tonight. But again, please go to the website to review the operating budget calendar. Councilmember Heidi Alderman, you have your hand raised?
Yes, thank you. I promise I'll be fast. I heard people talking about another meeting. I just was wondering if you could tell us the possible dates for that.
The next joint meeting will be scheduled, I believe it's January 12th, when we will have another joint meeting, but we will verify that. But it will be, Lunda's given me the thumbs up. So yes, January 12th will be the next joint meeting.
Okay, thank you so much.
Great. All right, with that, motion to adjourn. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Sorry, should have said it
So
differently.
moved.
I was about to say that.
Thank
I was
you.
like, so he's gonna just do my thing? Like, that's what we're doing right now? That's how it
Thank
is?
you,
Motion to adjourn.
Councilmember Diana Revelous. We appreciate it.
No problem.
All those in favor show by a raise of hand
Bye.
or verbal aye. Thank you. We stand adjourned at this point. Thank you all for participating. Much more discussion to come, but we are definitely off to a good start. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg, and thanks, everyone.
Good
Thank
night.
you, everyone. Have a great evening.